again, thank you, Amy, for putting all these announcements, giving you all the links to all the old meetings, all the YouTube links for the old meetings, and it'll keep you busy all summer long trying to catch up. Yeah, reason we're here. Dr. Jim Jennings, sorry, has agreed to speak to us about Mississippian fossils. Jim is a native of Illinois, and he got his BA from Southern Illinois University and his master's from University of Illinois and his doctorate from University of Michigan. He worked at the Paducah Community College, Eastern Kentucky University, the Illinois Geological Survey, and Southern Illinois University, and also worked in private practice as a consulting geologist. He's currently retired, but has been researching Mississippian fossil plants and is out here on a field work, and is stopping by to give us a update on what's happening in the mock chunk and others. Jim, thank you.
Let me set up your slides. Just let me say thank you, Kent, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. And so let me get started right away. Hopefully this is not okay. If a tree falls in the forest, not only will the sound not get preserved in the fossil record, but the leaves will go one direction, the stem will go another direction, the bark will go a third direction, the roots might stay in place. And then you'll find them preserved as molds, casts, or impressions. And also compressions if there's carbonaceous material left. I put adpressions up there because it's a bit of nonsense in the literature that has recently appeared. And I'm suggesting because they are predominantly found in siliciclastic, sillipressions would be a preferable term. And the finally, petrifactions, iron sulfide, iron oxide, calcite, and silica are the most common media for their preservation. And then there are the two kinds of petrifactions, permineralization and replacement. There's been an attack on the term petrifaction in recent years to try and equate it with permineralization, but don't worry about that. Unless you go to the permineralized forest, the petrifaction is a perfectly good term. Now then, particularly some of the most important and useful fossils that you can find are ones that combine compression, impression, and petrifaction. And I'll have a little bit to say about that, but mostly I won't have much to say about the petrifactions. Now, what happens? You have all of these separate plant parts. Okay, you have a bit of a leaf. What is it? Well, you don't know. Oh, but it looks like this kind of leaf. It has the same form. So people like naming things, and the multiplicity of form genera and species has appeared to address the problem. Now I'm listing all the various plant organs, stems, stem subsurfaces, leaves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you can have the names for any one of those as a separate entity. Sometimes not, sometimes they do. And if you find them petrified, you can get a whole different set of names. And one of the things that as paleobotanists do a lot of is to try and figure out what am I looking at? What kind of trying to reconstruct the whole plant from these various pieces. Okay, this is a Mississippian lycopod. And if we look at this, we got the outer surface here. May not have been the outer surface of the plant, it's the outer surface of the fossil. And that's one possibility for fossilization. Then the inner surface of that cortical layer, the outer surface, inner surface, and finally the outer surface of the xylem here at the center. So we got 5 different possible names out of one plant. But without the petrifactions, you wouldn't know that what you were dealing with. And it's just a long process to try and figure it out. Well, okay, where do they come from? Well, I was interested initially in the type Mississippian, which is from the Mississippi Valley and adjacent areas of the Illinois Basin, or as the Kentucky people would prefer to call it, Eastern Interior Basin. The blue border around the basin is highly productive if you can find the outcrops. The Valley Coal Field in Virginia has stuff, that's the Price Formation. And then probably most familiar to the people here would be the Pocono and Mauch Chunk formations here in Pennsylvania. Okay, looking at the type Mississippian, the Illinois is a craton, and the total thickness is only a little over 33,000 feet thick. The Valmiran is the middle part, mainly limestone. Some people would break it into Osagian, Merrimachian. I don't care one way or the other. And there's several different formations: limestone this, limestone that, limestone the other. And there are a couple of horizons that do contain fossil plants. The Chesterian, which I'll say more about in just a little bit, is a mixture of different lithologies, has 21 formations and a minimum of 15 plant-bearing horizons. Now, you may think I'm bluffing, and you may be onto something, because the Mississippian system was named for the bluffs along the Mississippian, and it was a wonderful one-day little excursion. Cave up here, and I don't know if we have anybody here who'd be interested in karst, but they're on groundwater, but both are involved here, unless you happen to be a landowner, and then they might not be so interested. The hammer sits on the productive horizon, and you say, what are these land plants doing in the middle of all of this marine limestone? Well, I guess you can ask them and see what they say. Okay, formations in the Chester series, starting with the Ovaz formation and extending up to the Grove Church formation at the top. The ones in green indicate ones that have yielded fossil plants that are of value. And you might guess that the ones that don't are in white are formations from which fossil plants have not been obtained and primarily marine. And there are a lot of marine limestones and shales. Okay, base of the Chester. Can anybody see a color change right there from limestone to sandstone? That's it's yet another case of mapping the climate change. The climate became wetter and allowed the fluvial systems to bring interregnous sediment into the Illinois Basin, and then the rest is history. Looking upstream a little bit here, this is higher up in the same. This is the same stream with siltstone and shales exposed. And where do the fossil plants? Where do you start to find the fossil plants as you look upward? Well, right where the outcrop disappears. That's the old story. And this overlies it, just an example of the lower part of the upper Mississippian Yankeetown formation. And tar springs, typical sort of, and the Dagonia, the uppermost of the various formations. And so now southwestern Virginia is a little more orogenic. So we're talking about 3 times, 5 times the thickness. And the Price formation at the bottom of the sequence is the one that has yielded the most material, but yes, so what do I do to get rid of that without?
Oops, I just advanced you.
Yeah, that's okay. And there are bits and pieces of fossils up in the upper above the Price formation, but very little studied, and who knows exactly what's there or not. Okay, then the price is just a typical outcrop of the price formation that looks probably similar to what you see here in Pennsylvania for most of you. The lithology in the around the margin of the anthracite fields is even more spectacular as far as the thicknesses are concerned. I will say that I don't mean to tell you how to name your rocks. I'm just following the leader. But the Mauch Chunk reaches a maximum thickness of somewhere around 6,000 feet plus or minus maybe, and the Pocono is 1,400 feet. It would work for the entire thickness of the Chester, just that one formation, and so. Look at some more outcrops. This is just east of Minersville on Route 901. I measured about 500 feet of red mudstone and gray conglomerates along the side of the highway. And then this is the business end of things. Now, shows the gray plant-bearing beds overlain by non-plant-bearing red beds. And no, the photograph is not upside down. The rocks are upside down. But those of you who've been there perhaps know they're about 85 degrees upside down, overturned to an angle a little beyond vertical. Okay, what's there? Okay, we'll talk about the major groups, and then I'll go through each of these through the with lower, middle, and upper. Okay, the lycopods. And we got some examples over here that you can look at. The lycopods had helically arranged appendages, leaves and branches and things, primarily leaves, and conspicuous leaf scars typically. The sthenophytes or arthrophytes had jointed stems where you had a node and then an inner node with nothing, and then a node with more appendages attached. And then eventually, as it got larger, the appendages were shed in most cases. And then the ferns, which and these are all reproduced by means of spores and through the agency of alternation of generations, where you have the sporophyte that produces spores. The spores produce gametophytes, and the gametophytes undergo fertilization and produce another sporophyte. Now then, we have the seeds appear first in the Upper Devonian and are well represented by the seed ferns. There is conifer-like wood in the Mississippian, but so far we haven't seen any of it that has been proven to be a seed plant. The Calixylon, known from the Devonian Mississippian boundary, is called a progymnosperm because it's a non-seed plant. So we'll just say no conifers till you find them. Go get them. Go get them. Up and at them. And then certainly no flowering plants, which didn't appear to the middle of the Mesozoic. Okay, start with the lycopods. Okay, this is a picture from the literature, and let me call your attention to leaf scar here, and then the leaf cushion, as they're called, sometimes otherwise called leaf bolsters, leaf bases. And there were some authors who back in 2010 suggested that the North American stuff was different from the European stuff because the European stuff didn't have any of that. Well, the European stuff does have it. It's in the original description, as you can see here. Now, unfortunately, you don't always find the surface. This has been decorticated. That not entirely it's a surface of somewhere in the cortex. Now you might ask me, well, I showed you that pretty picture of all of the various layers in the cortex. Which layer is it? Well, guess what? Nobody's ever found Lepidodendropsis or that petrified, so we don't know what we're dealing with here. We just know that this is not the surface because the surface has leaf bases. And this is much smaller picture than that. There's the leaf scar. And notice how they go from longer than wide to wider than long and then start back the other direction. Highly characteristic of Lepidodendropsis. Also characteristic of certain species of Lepidodendron, and more about that later. And moving to smaller branches, here we go with a close-up. This is sort of, if you want to identify Lepidodendropsis, here's your guy. Lepidodendropsis is named as a stem surface. And you've got some, did you pass that out to people as a handout? Or are they going to have to download it? You can download a list of all of the species that I'll be talking about today, and what their range is, and which plant parts they represent, and what we just don't have any idea about. But for starters, the leaf scars right here are tend to kind of bridge the gap between an ellipse and a diamond shape or rhomboid. And the lepidodendron, which we'll see later, was definitely rhomboid. In the center, there's a little bump. This is an impression that would have been on the surface of the stem as you would have looked at it in life. It would have been a little depression. That's where the vascular tissue, the xylem and phloem, were attached. So then we go smaller and smaller, and here are the leaves. Well, okay, is it a surprise that if you have very small leaf scars, you might have very narrow leaves? And the leaves on the Lepidodendropsis are very long, very narrow, very linear. Lycopod leaves are narrow, long, and linear in general, but they're even more so than the average. And so what about the sphenophytes? Sphenophytes are not too well represented in the Pocono and Price. This is from the Price, but then there are a few. Here's a node here and a node here. As my grandfather used to say, you knowed it was a node. And then there are ribs in between. And in Archaeocalamites, and I'll show you somewhere you can really see it later on, the ribs go straight on through the nodes instead of alternating as they do in the more famous Calamites. This is the base of the pith impression at the base. It narrows down toward the base because the diameter of the stem could have been yay big around, but the pith was just the inner part, and the plant started small, had a teeny tiny pith, and as it got bigger, it developed a larger pith. And so you might think you are looking at the tip, but no, that this is the right side up. Sorry, no ferns yet. We got the fern type life cycle, and there are things that had a fern type reproduction. They may have given rise to the ferns, but good question, who knows? Seed ferns are much more abundant, and C.B. Reed used as his Mamey and Reed later in their plural zones and provinces used this as adiantites as an indicator from the lower Pocono. I'm going to show you today examples from the middle Mississippian and the upper Mississippian of the genus adiantites, so that doesn't work so well. The other one is okay, we're dealing with seed ferns now. And this is the original photograph by W.P. Schimper of Triphyllopterus. And if we look at actual specimens and look at the drawing, you say, wow, that looks awfully similar. And there were a couple, Margaret Knaus decided she wanted to divide it into the genus Triphyllopterus into different genera. I think the question is whether they're different species. They're clearly the same genus. Now, Triphyllopterus is a bit of a misnomer in that he kind of looked and said, okay, we got three-parted foliage here. Well, true, but that's only one part of the frond. And if you look at the rest of the frond, it's not like that. But here's the distal part. And then another one with a whole lot of individual leaflets or pinnules attached. And then here's one with three. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So it did have them. And it's just that there's a range of variation that Schimper didn't appreciate back in the 19th century. But I'm pretty impressed with this work and what a good quality picture they had to hand draw, all that stuff had to be hand drawn, and yet, oh my goodness, that's the same thing. Okay, fan-shaped venation. You notice there's no central mid vein in the leaflet parts of this thing, and very rounded leaflets. Now there's variation and maybe different species based on the variation of that. Now there are seeds associated with Tripholopterus, and then you're wondering, what am I showing here? I can sort of see an axis going up here, and there's stuff. And I wish it were as pretty as I would like it to be, but closer up it looks better. This is definitely Tripholopterus type foliage. And then what about these things? Well, let's take a really close look at them. Well, my goodness, I see not only did I know it when I had a node, but now I see a seed. So here I see a seed, here I see the seed, or if you want to be technical about it, ovules. And these are ovules of the type of Netopsis, which is the name for this. And you notice the little hair-like projections at the extremity. I think they'd figured out what the dandelions figured out later, that if you have some little projections at the top, you can really be well dispersed by the wind. Okay, let's go back to Pennsylvania. That was from the Price Formation. Let's go back to Pennsylvania. This is right from up here at Pottsville, and got a fairly large frond with a axis here and another axis here and another axis here. So at least 3 times compound. And this is Spinopterus sturiana. And look at it a little closer and you see, oh yes, there is something there. Now, Reed called it Adiantides, and if any of you guys want to call it that, I won't be offended. I called it Spinopterus. Spinopterus is sort of the genus that, if you don't know what else to call it, you call it Spinopterus. You know, if you know it's a Neuropterus, you can call it that. If you know it's Allothopterus, you can call it that. But if you're not sure, it's Spinopterus. And so is this a good indicator species? I couldn't tell you. Maybe, maybe not. It's just not really common enough as far as I know. Now, you notice I used quotes around rhodia. Use it in quotes if you ever use it. Rhodia is a bad name. It's a junior homonym of another species, and somebody named Rhodiopteridium to try and get around that. But the problem is that the type species of Spinopterus is a rhodia type of foliage, and this is more of the same. Now, I might want to point, okay, these are subopposite here, and yet these are alternate here, very definitely alternate. And that's what you get, or that's what you would expect whenever you take a 3-dimensional branching system and flatten it out into a leaf. It's a geometric consequence. And it's just, gee, isn't it pretty? Notice how long and slender they are. That'll become significant as we look a little further into this. And we'll turn to the middle with the Mississippian. With my favorite, and I have a specimen for you to look at from the type locality of Almyrodendron triangulariifolium. And you can see the leaf scar, leaf scar, leaf scar, leaf scar, leaf scar, leaf scar, leaf scar. And you can draw a line through them. You could have drawn a line around it in a helix. As you look at it in a flat surface, it's a spiral. This has been very much flattened. And then like Lepidodendropsis, there's a single scar in the middle of the leaf representing the position of the vascular tissue. But, and here's some more of the same, shows a little better because of the carbon content. And here's the leaf. The leaf is relatively broad. You know, I know now that they had a long drawn out tip, but still the base is quite wide, and you typically find these as little triangles in the rock. And the sample that I brought shows a couple of those. So Elmirodendron triangulariifolium it is. Now, does this look red? Everybody?
Yeah.
And you notice how the ruler changed colors. Yes, it's quite. This is this is from the Mount Chunk out on Route 901. It's archaeocalamites. If you were to imprison me and say you've got to prove that those don't alternate in order to get out of prison, I might be stuck for a while, but you can bet your bottom dollar that they do go on straight on through. And I wanted to emphasize the point that you find the same things in the red beds that you do in the gray beds. Yes, this is a cute little gray bed that's interspersed with the Mount Chunk, but it doesn't mean it's got a different flora because it's in a different environment. It's got the same stuff and a different deposition, I guess, and just not quite as much of it. Okay, archaeocalamites, internode, node, internode, node, internode, and appendages born in whorls at each of the nodes. This is not quite as pretty a specimen, but here are 3 nodes, 1, 2, 3, appendages here, appendages here, appendages here. And if you get it flat, this is flattened in longitudinal view. If you get it flattened in cross-sectional view, this is what you see, and it shows quite a little better in the cross-sectional view. And you might ask, what are the appendages? That's just what they are, appendages. Are they leaves? Are they stems? Well, I'm not sure. They're much too robust for the typical archaeocalamites leaves, which is what you see here, which were very long and very slender and much forked. So I guess you might call them branches, or you might actually, I got the idea, study it in depth and give it a new name. Okay. Node, 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 and internodes in between. And then here are appendages coming out from each of those. Looking a little closer, this one that has been broken and bent down. And oh my goodness, we're looking at an archaeocalamidian cone. The sporophyte produced spores. Where did it produce the spores? In a cone. Calamites did the same thing, and even modern equisetum, which you can see by the riverside if you're in the right place, right here in Pennsylvania, had that characteristic. Sorry, still no ferns, but just wait, they're coming. Okay, Adiantides is the most notable representative of the flora in the Mount Chunk, probably subject to debate. It had spatulate leaflets or pinnules. They're narrow at the base and they fan out and they have a relatively blunt and relatively broad tip. Venation is fan-shaped. I got a better picture of that in this close-up of this specimen, where you can see the venation here in some of these leaflets or pinnules. And notice now that the leaflets are pinnules are kind of flattened one on top of the other. And that is in fact a botanical characteristic based on the structure of this. It hadn't figured out how to be completely flat yet. And so it was producing leaflets in this direction, leaflets in this direction, leaflets in this direction, and not just in one plane. And we'll see more of that. Just in case, here's one where I happened to get lucky and they were in one plane, and what's not to like. All right, well, and you wonder, why is this so crummy looking? Well, because it's out of the red beds, but there it is. Spatulate leaflets, the same, Adiantides, probably the same species. And then also the Rhodiotype Sphenopterus. Notice that it's not quite as the ultimate appendages are not quite as long and slender as they are in the lower Mississippian stuff. And I wish I could say with more certainty exactly what's going on with that respect to that, but it does seem to be a trend through the Mississippian for them to get shorter and thicker. Okay, then there were laminate foliar units. I'm calling this Sphenopterus. And Sphenopterus elizabethae is known from the Coleman in Europe. Now, the upper Mississippian has bona fide lepidodendron. This is Lepidodendron feltmanii, excuse me, and it has rather large leaf scars here, and they were strongly protuberant. They stuck out quite a distance, and then they had these prominent leaf cushions, or use other names if you wish, which without much in the way of ornamentation. All right, same species. Okay, it develops during maturation. This was as the plant matured, there was proliferation of the bark or cortex. And so if you look closely here, oh my goodness, there's a leaf scar, there's a leaf scar, there's a leaf scar, there's a leaf scar, and then this rough textured material in between, which is represents the proliferation of the cortex, or if you want to call it bark, that's fine. That's just a normal thing that happens. Now then, this is from higher up in the section that was middle to lower Chester. This is upper Chester, and they have these very, very small leaf bases and cushions and so forth. And the question is, well, is this the same species as this? Is this the same species as this? And that's what I called it. And the jury is out on whether that's right or not, or even if it, if you look at a lineage through time, there's going to be variation, even though it's all one species at any one given time. So hopefully time will tell on some of that. But if you find the real small ones, you might suspect you are in the upper part of the Chester. This is the other widespread genus of or species of Lepidodendron, and this is Lepidodendron folkmanianum, longer than wide, wider than long, longer than wide. I have never seen Lepidodendron feltmanii do that, but Lepidodendron folkmanianum does it just as a natural course. Does that mean it's related to Lepidodendropsis? Well, it could. Does that mean that that the suggestion that the sporangia in Lepidodendropsis were born at where the leaf scars are wider than long? Well, you can't say one way or another, but this had perfectly legitimate lycopod cones, the same as other self-respecting lycopods. So I would say, let's just look at another picture. And so some of what you see is from development. Some of what you see never was a given way, but the shoot apex may have matured out or may not have. Modern angiosperms, they just keep on growing and growing and growing. They never stop as long as they're alive. Did these stop growing at some point? Maybe. But they definitely, this is Lepidodendron folkmanianum with the proliferation of the cortical tissue. And then this is what's called syringodendron. You see it has these little paired scars. And the people looked at back in the 19th century, looked at that and said, oh, that's cute. Okay, we'll give it a name, syringodendron. And then they found out that syringodendron occurs as a subsurface of sigillaria, but I'm here to tell you that leaf scar, leaf scar, leaf scar, leaf scar, pair of scars, that it also occurs as a subsurface of Lepidodendron in the case of Lepidodendron folkmanianum. So, lycopod leaves, what can you do with them? not much, just enjoy, know they're there. Maybe there's something better. Or maybe you can figure out what to do with them. Usually they're, typically in a case like this, there'd be cuticle. Notice that they're long and linear, but the Lepidodendropsis leaves are even longer and narrower than these. Okay, then this is what they look like in the very distal part of the plant of Lepidodendron. Much shorter leaves and densely covering the plant in a three-dimensional array. Now, sporophylls, leaves with spores, and referable to the genus Lepidostropophyllum. And no, I didn't measure what direction. I didn't say it preserved the current lineation, but they're conspicuously, there obviously was a current there. And the spores occur at the base. So here's the sporangium here with the spores in it, or if there are any left. And then the leaf-like part. So just a cone fragment showing the structure there. This is more typically what you find. I'm not sure that I've even got the leaf-like part preserved, but very definitely a lot of sporangia on a very narrow axis. Okay, Stigmaria ficoides. Looks just like what you see in the Pennsylvanian. But there's also this stuff in the Mississippian. And move in a little closer. This is called Stigmaria stellata. And then the question was, is Stigmaria stellata for real or is it a fake? And by that I mean, is it really a separate taxon? Well, it turns out that the answer is yes, it's a separate taxon, but the pattern, the surface that gives rise to the stellata pattern is neither the outer surface, nor is it the inner surface of the cortex, nor the stele or any of the other layers. So if you find Stigmaria stellata, ipso facto, Stigmaria ficoides is there somewhere. Because if the plant it was a plant, if it produced Stigmaria stellata, it produced Stigmaria ficoides. Now, on the other hand, you can't go the other way. If it produced Stigmaria ficoides, it did not necessarily produce Stigmaria stellata. Stigmaria stellata is a pretty good indicator species for the late Mississippian. And then we got, I told you I'd show you one where you could really see the ribs go through the nodes. This is Archaeocalamites. I'm calling this is the Archaeocalamites from the upper Mississippian is distinctly different from the Archaeocalamites from the Mauch Chunk. I'm calling them species 1 and species 2. And there are various reasons for that, but we have node, 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 and then the ribs go right straight through the nodes. And in any specimen, there are going to be exceptions to that because the number of vascular bundles changes as you go distally or proximally. And each time, if you have generally a non-alternation, then you lose a bundle, you'll have alternation. If you have generally alternation, you lose a bundle, you'll have non-alternation for right there. And then sometimes you have ones that are sort of halfway in between. They call them mesocalamites sometimes, just in case you were wondering. This is a small one. You can't see it nearly so well, but and then really small, you have the leaves attached, and you can see bifurcation here, bifurcation here, and node, 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 and whorls of leaves. In this case, I do know what they are. They're not just appendages. These are leaves for sure. And the same thing here. We've got a node, leaves, node, internode, leaves, internode, leaves, internode, leaves, and oh, where was there's one of these? Oh yeah, there's a good example of where one bifurcates. And that's just, they're very, very narrow and slender, and not so much like the leaves of calamites, although there's a lot of variation in those, which leaves of calamites you might find in the Pennsylvanian. If you get them squashed in the other plane, you get this. And these are just Archaeocalamites leaves squashed transversely to the direction of the stem. And again, you can see the bifurcations probably more easily here than in the last couple of pictures. And unfortunately, these get called sphenophyllum a lot. And they're just archaeocalamites, Sphenophyllum tenoremum. They're just archaeocalamites leaves. And did they have cones? Yes, indeed. We have cones. Here's a whorl of cones and one preserved in a partial view, and then an isolated cone and attached appendages. Okay, and if you have appendages that on which you have sporangia borne, you call it sporangia with born on an appendage, don't you? Sporangiophore is the term that they used, and it just means appendage with sporangia on it. The sporangia occur. Okay, here's the sporangiophore coming out here. It ends in typically in what shall I call it, a hammerhead, hex head hammer or something. And then if you come back toward the main stem, the sporangia were born in here and here and so on and so on. And well, you've been waiting. I'm glad you're so patient. And the interesting thing is that the ferns, these are absolutely as early as you're going to find ferns, and yet it would look perfectly happy in my own fern garden. You know, the family is called Cynopterid. It's an extinct family of ferns. And just to keep things complicated, if it's sterile, you call it Picopterus. If it's fertile, you call it Semptonbergia. Because of the type, the Semptonbergia is a type of sporangium with thick-walled cells at the end, and thick-walled cells would dry out and wink, off go your spores into the environment without anybody to say they shouldn't be despoiled. And so the seed ferns are the most, is Picopterus aspera. Is this a good indicator for the late Mississippian? Yes, I would say. And Adiantites bicei, Adiantites, it's perfectly good Adiantites, but it's a different species. The species distinguish it from what's in the mock chunk and the Pocono, but it's still the same at the generic level. And did I show you some, you do remember way back when I showed you leaflets that were one on top of the, this does, one on top of the other, this does the same thing. So you've got side view of leaflets, face view of leaflets, side view of leaflets, side view of leaflets, face view of leaflets, face view of leaflets. So it's very much a three-dimensional array of leaflets. And that is quite characteristic of the genus. And that didn't mean it was too proud to make fiddleheads or croziers. Any of you, any fern enthusiasts in here? When the fern frond is just developing, it unfurls. And as it's unfurling, that is called a crozier or fiddlehead. You can't what?
What a capture.
Yeah.
Cool, huh? Thank you. Then you find these things. And what are these? These are pollen organs. And this is part of a frond with pinnules, or leaflets if you prefer. And guess what we got? Same thing attached. So this is when you find out things about, okay, yay, I got it. I finally found it. I found it. Okay, then here's another one. And then you also find these structures in with them. Well, what were these structures all about? These structures were all about seeds. A seed, it had a seed, and their seeds go in here and in here and in here. And then they had these very long appendages. And you get a structure that looks like this when they're all meshed together before they were dispersed. Well, this is also a picture of Netopsis, this ovule here and the long appendages, one here, one here, one here, and one here. There are 4 of them all together. And you're waiting for the end of the story. Well, of course, this is what I was looking for. There are the leaflets. So it's the same foliage type. And then here's the seed-bearing organ with Netopsis seeds. So proof, it's a seed fern, by golly. And no proof on this one. This is probably a seed, I would say it's a seed fern. This is a little questionable for biostratigraphic purposes because it occurs in one formation of the Chester, then you have the same formation, the same form. We're dealing not with plants here, we're dealing with form genera. The same form up in the Pennsylvanian. Okay, if these orbicular pinnules were originally called Cardiopterus and then segregated out, and there was a problem with the name Cardiopterus, so Reed and Mamey called it Phryopsis and used it as the basis of one of their floral zones. Well, there was a better name for it. The better name is Cardiopteridium. And there are these orbicular, pretty rounded pinnules with a slender base. So no wonder you find them, you don't find them attached to anything very often. Seed fern, probably. Then here's some smaller ones and still smaller ones. And that's where the seeds, what kind of seeds did it have? What kind of pollen did it have? What kind of roots did it have? What kind of stem did it have? No one knows. But it is a good, even as Reed and Mamey supposed, it is a good indicator species for the late Mississippian. Now, Neuropterus as a genus is characteristic of the Pennsylvanian primarily, but Neuropterus antecedens occurs in the upper Mississippian. And I had long wondered if it belonged in the genus Neuropterus, but it turns out that some work in Arkansas has revealed medullosing seed fern anatomy from the late Mississippian in Arkansas. So I'm thinking probably it is where it belongs. And that would be within the seed ferns, within the group of seed ferns with medullosing anatomy. Okay, then can't get away from the Sphenopterus type rhodia sort of foliage and look at it a little closer. And again, you see the trend holds, they're shorter and not so slender as the early Mississippian ones. And there they are. So next thing is to look for fertile stuff. And this is the fertile stuff attached on the fronds of Sphenopterus of the rhodia type. It's called telangiopsis. It was originally telangium until somebody found that telangium name wasn't available, so they called it telangium. It's a little cup-shaped organ of a series of sporangia around a central fleshy base. And more seed ferns. This is a particularly good indicator for the late Mississippian, Sphenopterus stricta or bermudensiformis. I don't know which name would be the best. Their opinions seem to differ on that, but it has these very, very rounded pinnules. And you find things like this in the Pennsylvanian, but they're much, much larger. And probably also related. It's probably with anatomy, the type referred to heterangium. And then Sphenopterus fragilis is in the very, very top of the Mississippian. And you see the frond forking into 2 pieces there, which is frequently found in seed ferns. And then we'll look a little closer. Not as rounded, a little more linear. I would call your attention to the fact that we do have a good midvein here. And and laterals coming off of that. Then finally, Sphenopterus machinocii, if we look a little closer at that, and yet a little closer, okay, more rhodia type Sphenopterus, more rhodia type Sphenopterus, still highly dissected, but not as long, not as slender. And then this is a little hard to see, but here's the main axis coming up here. And then here's another one over here, and the leaflets or pinnules are coming off of that and moving a little long, forward a little. Well, look, this is Sphenopterus obovata, named for the obovate shape of the leaflets. So obovate is ovate. You've got the narrow part toward the tip, toward the base. The tip is broad but rounded, unlike spatulate, where it's sort of chopped off. Or okay, now what would life be without a few dispersed seeds and seed-bearing organs? This is Calimotheca or Calimerotheca, depending on who can spell and who can't, and whether that matters for botanical nomenclature or whether it doesn't. Okay, here's one that hasn't opened up yet. This one has, and this one have opened up and dispersed seeds. And then here's another one just to emphasize, here's one before it opened up. And isolated seeds are not terribly uncommon. This is Trigonocarpus. I'll show you in this specimen why we call it Trigonocarpus. 1, 2, 3. It's got a three-parted seed coat. And what you find typically are casts of the inside of the seed coat. And then this is probably related, Rhynchogonium. In this case, you have 9. Now, according to the literature, this varied, sometimes 7, 8, or 10, but 9 is what I have here. 9 is what I would expect. And okay, not such a good indicator of the Mississippian, although they're smaller than the Trigonocarpus normally in the Pennsylvanian. Good indicator of the Mississippian, Rhynchogonium is. Okay, trends in the Mississippian seed ferns from a three-dimensional frond to a flat frond, from alternate and opposite to alternate, from dissected to webbed or laminate, from fan-shaped veins to mid-vein with branch veins, from extremely low diversity to low diversity. And low diversity is higher than extremely low diversity, but it's the diversity that you find in even in the late Mississippian. It's nothing like what you have in the Pennsylvanian. And then from tiny seeds to small seeds, same thing. Okay, I've already talked about this, so I'm not going to recapitulate any to speak of. You'll have it in your, you can download it, but I'm giving here the ranges, the occurrence of each of the various species about which I've spoken. And same thing for the middle Mississippian. The Lepidodendropsis occurs in the middle Mississippian, or is it the early Mississippian? Well, is it the Mauch Chunk or is it the Pocono? And there's some doubt about that, and so I reflect that with a question mark. Okay, the Chester series, the late Mississippian, takes 2 pages. And so we got the lycopods and a few seed ferns, lycopods, Archaeocalamites, couple of seed ferns here, and a whole lot more seed ferns here. Seed ferns are particularly useful if you're trying to do detailed biostratigraphy. And you notice very few of these go on into the Pennsylvanian. That's what the arrow indicates, is that they continue on. Then, okay, now, the bottom line as far as the upper Mauch Chunk is concerned also applies to the lower Mauch Chunk. The very top of the Mauch Chunk has these things in it, these 4 different types. No lycopods, sorry about that. But, and then the Chester series has all of these various things. Not one species in common. Okay, now, every one of these things occurs in Europe, in the Colm and the Donantian, and whatever you happen to call it. at any one given time, but conclusion, the Mauch chunk is pre-Chester. That was a surprise because the mappers who went through there were saying, "Oh, the upper Mauch chunk interfingers with the lower Pennsylvanian Pottsville Formation." Well, it doesn't. There's a whole lot of missing time somewhere there. Where is it missing? Is there are we missing a big unconformity? Quite possibly, or is there something else going on? That's also possible. But what I can say for definite is that it predates the top of the Mauch chunk, predates the top of the base of the Chester. And then looking at the correlations with Europe, okay, the top of the, no. There we go. The top of the Chester is an unconformity. The base of the Namurian in Europe, in its type area in Europe, is an unconformity. They do not overlap. There is a certain amount of missing time in there. Why is it missing? I don't know what happened. Somebody lost it over, this is too many million years ago, somebody lost it. That's what happened, I guess. And the base is somewhere down in the Visayan. Well, if the Mauch chunk is pre-Chester, then the top of the Mauch chunk is somewhere in the Visayan and goes down, and I was just guessing, maybe into the Tornasian, who knows? And the Pocono and Price have been classified as Tornasian right along, and I'm just following the leader on that one. And what next? Well, stay tuned. It's an ongoing process of learning. And I thank you all for your attention. And I would be happy to address any complaints, questions, smart remarks, or whatever you may have to offer.
Bill, any questions? People online can put their question in the chat.
Yes.
Well, you answered my first question was the Illinois Basin same plant fossils as Pennsylvania and Virginia? You just answered it, so I have to go to my next.
Not so far.
Okay,
They got to be there somewhere.
yeah.
But you know, fossil plants in marine limestone are hard to come by, and you have facies considerations also.
Your fossils are so, the photos and your fossils are so well done. I'm just wondering if you had any preparation, dyeing or anything like that?
I
Or is
didn't
it
dye
just a
first.
contrast.
Oh, you mean how do I get the fossils to show up?
Yeah, yeah, that's contrast.
Tricky lighting and use specimens that look good.
Right.
You know, I have plenty of specimens that don't look as nice as some of what I showed that are the same.
Better than black on black.
Yeah, right. Well, I showed you two specimens of upper Mississippian Archaeocalamites leaves, and one has lovely contrast, and the other is black on black. So
Yeah. If you give me one more, is Archaeocalamites similar to horsetails or?
absolutely,
Okay.
it's a part of the horsetail is a general category.
Yeah.
Equivalent to sphenophite or arthrophyte or any what you might use for that. The closest relative of Archaeocalamites is the extinct genus Calamites, and both Archaeocalamites and Calamites are directly related to horsetail, scouring rush, equisetum is the Latin name, or whatever you want, a section grass, if you want to call it that. It's lots of fun for kids to pull it apart into sections. I know from experience. And now, of course, I'm much too old for that now.
Any other questions?
The Archaeocalamites,
Yeah,
I know in the Pennsylvanian, and I'm just going to make an assumption in Mississippian, you'll see the ribs, but that's under a outer layer, like a skin that'll erode away really quickly and exposes those ribs. And now and then I'll find calamites in the Pennsylvanian that shows that, but have you found that?
Oh, the outer surface of archaeocalamites, yes, yes, certainly. And it's smooth, sort of smooth and uninteresting, same as most calamites. Most calamitians have very fine striations in the outer surface, but the ribs, the really stuff, the characteristic that jumps out at you is in the pith. And then you get you can get the pith, you can get the outer surface squashed on top of the pith. So you're looking at the outer surface and it has the ribs that actually are part of the pith and fun things like that. Oh, yeah.
I presume most, if not all of these structures are conserved in modern plants.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, structures, yes. I mean, they have leaves, they have cones, they have fronds, they have roots.
Seed ferns still?
No seed ferns. Oh, well, maybe. It's possible that the seed ferns are as extinct as the dinosaurs. And, well, did you not hear any dinosaurs singing to you this morning? I heard the wood thrush singing, and I enjoy dinosaurs very much. Cool. But the seed ferns flourished in the Paleozoic, and then nobody knows for sure what happened to them. There is a considerable speculation that that's where the angiosperms came from, the flowering plants. Maybe, maybe not.
So the venation on that one leaf that you're showing certainly looks strikingly like a ginkgo.
Oh, yeah, it's no relation there.
Okay.
The ginkgo is, well, of course, we have extant examples of ginkgo, or ginkgo if you prefer. And it's a Chinese word. It's the pronunciation is sort of in between anything that we can say with our mouths. It has a fan-shaped venation, but it's well known to be, the seeds are well known and they're nothing like what you find on Adiantites. And of course, it was named originally for Adiantum, which is a fern, and it's nothing like that either, but the form of the foliage looks similar. And we're dealing with form genera, and only after we deal with form genera for who knows how many years do we actually start to be able to put them together. Finding, examples of, oh, hey, I have a leaflet here and this is petrified. Oh, I might find out something about the internal structure of this. But if you're looking at them from a biostratigraphic standpoint, you're not going to do biostratigraphy from petrifactions. You just, you look in the field and you see, I think I got one here that might be petrified. Or it might not be petrified. And the only way you find out is if you do specialized techniques to develop to develop it as a microscope slide specimen. And but the petrifactions are very important in that they allow us to understand what we're looking at when we see the things that we, I say, originally Syringodendron was thought to be one plant and Sigillary another plant and Lepidodendron a third plant. It turns out Lepidodendron is one plant and some types of Lepidodendron had Syringodendron subsurface and some types of Sigillary had Syringodendron subsurface. And it just gets, well, if it weren't complicated, would it be interesting? Yeah. No, somebody had done it 100 years ago. You had a question, I thought, Rosanna.
I was just gonna say, if you were hunting in the Mauch-Chunk, would you focus on any gray or black beds as opposed to red?
Well, if you can find them, yeah, for sure. Well, the red coloration is iron oxide. Iron, if there's a lot of sulfur around, the iron will not be found in the oxidized phase. It will be, you'll find iron pyrite or marcasite or whatever instead. And so Yes, so as I first cast my beady eyes on the first example of adiantite is why I thought, oh, I was looking, oh, here's some gray rock. Oh, this gray rock has a fossil in it. Oh, this fossil is adiantites, no less. Oh my goodness. That's Mississippian, folks. And not even the top of the Mississippian in that particular case, as things turn out. Now, of course, that was 40 years ago or 50 years. Was it 60? Well, I was in graduate school still, I think, at the time. Amy Randolph asked me, well, how did you get interested in Pennsylvania? It's because you guys have a stranglehold on the tight Pennsylvanian, doggone it. I wouldn't either. And don't think you're gonna get any of our Mississippian types.
The introduction to the Pennsylvania.
That's right. Well, I mean, it very much is. And, you know, there are little bitty coals in the Mississippian, in the Illinois Basin, no less. There was one place where it got up to about, I think around 2 feet. It was enough that Peabody Coal drilled some drill holes, but it wasn't extensive enough laterally, and it was very high sulfur, so they didn't pay any more attention to it. That was the end of that, and then there are a lot of 4 and 3, 2, 3, 4, and 6 inch coal from place to place, and in southwestern Virginia, in the Price Formation, it was heavily mined for quite a long while. And that's all Mississippian coal there. So if you find what you find, and if there are enough plant fossils, or if there are enough plants around, it'll be gray or black. And if there aren't so many plant fossils around, it might get to be red. But just because it's red doesn't mean there aren't any. They need, you know, they can still be there.
Well, thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Well, you are certainly welcome. Thank you for having me. Well, thank you.
If folks online want to stay on, I can drop
Yeah, no,
his files in the chat.
Yeah.
And if you guys want the species list
yeah.
and the bibliography, you can give me your email and I'll send it to you.
Okay, I'll let you
Okay.
do that. Before we conclude, there is a sign-in sheet over here. So those of you seeking PDH credits, please sign in. We have guidebooks to give away, so please help yourself, as well as
would you like to
publications over here. And I'd like to say, I think we should all thank Kent for his years of service as president of the. And this summer, we'll give you some information on the inaugural ball, or maybe coronation. Maybe we should do that. So have a wonderful summer, and we'll see
Hey,
you
you the
in
same.
September.
And we got some real rocks to look at if anybody wants to do that. And